Dust hung thick and palpable in the air, pierced by the occasional rays of weak autumn sunlight filtering through boarded-up windows. The smell was stale, with hints of medicine, mildew, and something indefinably sinister that tickled the nostrils and sent an unpleasant chill down the spine. Andrew stepped across the threshold of the former psychiatric hospital, Silent Terror, an ironic name, given its grim reputation. He was young, full of skepticism and a thirst for sensation. Working as a freelance reporter for the local newspaper brought neither fame nor much money, and the story of the abandoned asylum, shrouded in creepy legends, seemed like a goldmine. Locals avoided the place, telling chilling tales of screams echoing from the empty windows at night and of the ghosts of unfortunate patients forever trapped within its walls. Andrew smirked at these superstitions. His scientific mindset didn't allow him to believe in ghosts, but he admitted that the abandoned building itself could inspire fear. And this hospital looked exactly like that, a majestic but dilapidated stone structure, with gaping window sockets and a lopsided roof, like an old sick man. He was accompanied by a grim man in his 50s, who introduced himself as Simon. He worked as a watchman on the grounds adjacent to the hospital and, for a small fee, had agreed to take Andrew inside. Simon was taciturn and constantly frowned, as if just being there caused him physical pain. "Be careful in here, kid," Simon grumbled, squeezing through a gap in the collapsed door. "It's not a good place." Andrew nodded, though he was more interested in the peeling poster on the wall that read, "Tranquility, the key to recovery." The irony was palpable. Inside it was dim, peeling paint on the walls, crumbling plaster, broken glass underfoot. Everything spoke of long neglect. The corridor stretched ahead like a snake, disappearing into the darkness. The air was thick with the smell of stagnant water and dust. Simon pulled an old flashlight from his pocket, and the narrow beam of light caught a dilapidated door with a sign, "Surgical Ward." "Better not go in there," Simon said in a low voice. "Things happen there." Andrew felt a wave of curiosity rise within him. Of course, he would go there. That's where the most interesting finds would surely be. They moved further down the corridor. The doors of the wards were open or torn off their hinges. Inside, rusty remnants of beds, overturned bedside tables, and scraps of tattered clothing were visible. In places, the walls were scratched, as if someone had desperately tried to get out. In one of the wards, Andrew noticed a drawing scratched on the wall, a strange figure with many eyes and long, clawed hands. The drawing looked sinister and unnatural. "What's this?" Andrew asked, shining his flashlight on the image. Simon glanced at it and grimaced. "Who knows what they drew here? Sick people. They have their own fantasies." But there was a tension in his voice that made Andrew doubt his indifference. They passed several more wards until they stood before a massive metal door. A rusty sign still hung on it. "Isolation. Things were really bad in here," Simon muttered, as if talking to himself. "They put the most violent ones in here." Andrew tried to push the door open, but it wouldn't budge. Simon pulled a bunch of old keys from his pocket and, after rummaging through them, selected one. The lock clicked with a nasty screech. Inside the isolation room, it was even darker and colder than in the corridor. A small barred window let in barely any light. In the center of the room stood a massive bed bolted to the floor with leather straps. But that wasn't all. The room looked strange. The same multi-eyed figures Andrew had seen earlier were scratched on the walls. A strange, sweetish odor, reminiscent of rotten flowers, hung in the air, and there was something subtly wrong with the very atmosphere of the room, something oppressive and sinister. Simon, frozen in horror, muttered, "There shouldn't be anyone here. The hospital's been abandoned for years." Andrew slowly stepped forward. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked quietly. The woman stopped crying and slowly raised her head. What Andrew saw made him recoil. Her eyes, they were completely white without pupils. She looked directly at him, but it seemed as if she was looking through him into some other invisible reality. A slow, chilling smile spread across her lips. "You've come, finally," she whispered in a hoarse voice. Before Andrew could say anything, the woman abruptly jumped to her feet. Her movements were unnaturally sharp and jerky. She lunged at Andrew, letting out an inhuman shriek. Simon pushed Andrew aside and took the blow himself. The woman latched onto his shoulder with incredible force. Simon cried out in pain. Andrew regained his senses and grabbed the nearest piece of a broken chair. He struck the woman on the back. She hissed and released Simon, turning to Andrew. Her white eyes burned with some unhealthy fire. She took a step towards him, and Andrew felt a chilling dread. There was something inhuman about this woman. Simon, clutching his bleeding shoulder, croaked, "We have to run." Andrew nodded, realizing Simon was right. They couldn't handle this creature. They bolted back into the corridor, pursued by the woman's horrifying wail. Her footsteps sounded strangely light and fast behind them. They ran through the dark corridors, stumbling over debris and rubble. Andrew felt a presence following them, something unseen and sinister. It seemed to him that the walls of the hospital were closing in on them, whispering insane voices. Reaching the reception area, they burst outside into the cool autumn air. The woman didn't follow them. Stopping to catch their breath, Andrew looked back at the grim building of the hospital. The windows looked like black voids silently watching them. "What was that?" Andrew asked, gasping for air. Simon was silent, his face as pale as a sheet. He was still holding his bleeding shoulder. "I told you, not a good place," he finally muttered. Andrew felt his skepticism completely crumble. What they had seen inside defied any rational explanation. But the story didn't end there. In that moment, Andrew understood that he had accidentally touched something dark and ancient that dwelled within the walls of this cursed hospital, and that something now knew about him. Suddenly, Simon shuddered and grabbed Andrew's arm with such force that he winced in pain. "Did you hear that?" Simon whispered, his eyes wide with terror. Andrew listened. From inside the hospital came a quiet but distinct sound. A giggle. A child's creepy giggle that seemed to penetrate right into his soul. The giggling grew louder, and other sounds joined it: soft footsteps, whispers, scraping. It seemed as if the hospital was coming alive, awakening from a long sleep. Andrew felt an icy dread grip him. They had awakened something, and that something was now coming out. They ran, without looking back, without choosing a path. They just wanted to get as far away from that cursed place as possible. But even as they ran, Andrew felt someone's unseen gaze on him, and the creepy child's giggle echoed in his ears for a long time. They sped down the overgrown road, stumbling over tree roots and stones. Andrew's heart pounded in his chest like a trapped bird. Behind them, a sticky, invisible fear seemed to linger. Reaching Simon's car, parked not far from the hospital gates, they jumped inside. Simon's hands trembled as he inserted the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and the car lurched forward, leaving behind the sinister silhouette of silent terror. They drove to the town in silence. Simon occasionally cast frightened glances in the rearview mirror. Andrew felt drained and shaken. His rational world had collapsed. What he had seen and heard in the hospital defied any explanation. Arriving home, Andrew's first act was to lock all doors and windows. He could still hear the creepy giggle in his ears and see the woman's white, bottomless eyes. He tried to tell his friend, a police officer, what had happened, but the friend merely gave him a sympathetic smile, suggesting Andrew was simply overworked. However, Andrew knew that what had happened in the hospital was real. From that night on, nightmares plagued him. He saw the abandoned corridors, the multi-eyed drawings on the walls, and the white figure looming out of the darkness. A few days later, Andrew decided he couldn't just leave it at that. He felt he had to understand what was happening at Silent Terror. Perhaps there were still other unfortunates there, needing help, or Perhaps there was something there that needed to be stopped. Without saying anything to Simon, Andrew returned to the hospital one night. The moon hung in the sky like a malevolent eye, illuminating the grim building. This time he was alone. Slipping inside through a broken window, Andrew armed himself with a flashlight and a camera. He wanted to document everything he found. Inside, it was even quieter and scarier than before. It seemed as if time itself had stopped here. Andrew cautiously moved through the corridors, lighting his way. He saw the drawings on the walls again, the rusty beds, and the scattered belongings. In one of the wards, he found an old diary. The entries were written in a shaky hand and filled with delirium and terror. The patient wrote about shadows that whispered at night, strange experiments, and a creature with white eyes that stole souls. The deeper Andrew ventured into the hospital, the stronger the feeling of an unseen presence became. He felt as if he was being watched from every dark corner. He approached the room where they had encountered the woman again. The door was open. The room was empty, but that same sweetish odor still hung in the air. Suddenly, there was a soft rustling sound behind him. Andrew spun around sharply, shining his flashlight down the corridor. No one was there, but the feeling of being watched intensified. Andrew felt goosebumps crawl down his spine. He became truly frightened. He decided to leave. He had seen enough. But as he turned to go back, a figure appeared at the end of the corridor. It stood in the shadows, but Andrew recognized the silhouette. It was the same woman with the white eyes. She slowly moved towards him, and in the silence of the corridor, that creepy child's giggle echoed again. Andrew froze in terror. He realized he had made a mistake coming back here alone. The woman approached. Her white eyes glowed in the dim light. She reached out her hand towards him. At that moment, something distracted her. From deep within the hospital came a loud, drawn-out howl, full of pain and rage. The woman froze, turning her head towards the sound. That moment was enough for Andrew. He turned and fled back towards the exit. He ran as fast as he could without looking back. The howl behind him grew louder, mixing with the creepy giggling. It felt like the entire hospital was chasing him. Bursting outside, Andrew collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. He looked back at the hospital. A shadow flickered in one of the windows. Andrew never returned to silent terror, but he never forgot what he had seen and heard there. Nightmares continued to haunt him, and sometimes, in the silence, it seemed to him that he could again hear that creepy child's giggle, drifting from somewhere far away. A reminder that evil doesn't always stay locked up. Sometimes he thought he saw white eyes in the crowd.